All right. So, on the evening of May 28th, 2023, in the small Italian town of Sanago, a 29-year-old woman named Giulia Tramontano just mysteriously disappeared. She was 7 months pregnant, and she wasn't answering her calls, had basically lost all contact with her family. Her partner, Alessandro Impiantoni, the man she lived with, he was the first one to report her missing. He claimed that when he got back home from work, he found their apartment empty. He said he had, supposedly, no idea where his beloved could have gone. You know, from the very beginning, there were just way too many strange things about this case. Giulia hadn't taken most of her personal belongings with her, and her plans for the near future. Well, they didn't include suddenly disappearing. So, investigators started studying her last actions, and they pretty soon encountered even more disturbing facts. The night before she disappeared, Giulia had sent some messages to her mother, Laura Danny, and also to a friend, telling them she'd had a really serious fight with Alessandro. She was upset, and she wrote that the whole situation was just deeply, deeply troubling her. But the main question still remained unanswered. What really happened that fateful evening? And I mean, if Giulia truly did leave the house, why had no one seen her since? Within just a few days, the investigation would start to unravel this whole web of lies, and it would lead to a horrifying truth. Giulia Tramontano. She was born on May 2nd, 1994, in the small town of Sanantama, which is in the province of Naples. She grew up surrounded by a family where, support and warmth were just the way things were. Her parents, from childhood, really instilled in her a drive for independence. The family valued traditions, and I guess despite having modern views, home was always that place you could go back to for advice and comfort.
Giulia ha dimostrato a una nazione intera che cos'è l'amore. L'amore per un figlio, l'amore per una famiglia, il rispetto per la vita.
After she finished school, Giulia got interested in the real estate field. She loved architecture, she was interested in investments, and she pictured herself as this successful realtor. So after graduating from school, she went to university and got the right education for it. And with her analytical mind and really excellent communication skills, she mastered the profession pretty quickly. By the age of 25, she had already earned a good reputation for herself in the field. But for Giulia, that just wasn't enough. She dreamed of life in a big city, one that was full of opportunities. By the time she was 26, her career in her hometown had kind of hit a ceiling. Working at a real estate agency, she understood that her prospects there were limited. So, inspired by stories from some acquaintances, she decided she was going to move to Milana City, that to her seemed like it would open up all these new opportunities. By the end of 2020, her decision was finally made. Milan was a symbol of independence, of new acquaintances, and the career that she dreamed of. The preparation for the move went pretty quickly. She packed up her things, said goodbye to her family, and then the young woman set off for the city that was supposed to become her new home. So, after moving, Giulia she threw herself right into work. In Milan, the real estate market was really dynamic, and it demanded boldness and persistence. She adapted quickly. She started establishing contacts, attending meetings, and making deals. This new life, it inspired her, but in the middle of all those work days, personal happiness was kinda lacking. It was during this period that she met Alessandro. Their meeting happened in one of Milan's little spots, a place where her colleagues had invited her after a successful deal. Alessandro worked as a bartender at a luxurious bar in a 5-star hotel. He was a year older than her, charming, always smiling, and he easily found common ground with people. His confidence and charisma, that's what attracted Giulia too. She felt that she could relax around him, kind of forget about her work worries, and just enjoy the moment. The first weeks of them talking passed without a cloud. They spent evenings in restaurants, walked through the city at night, and made plans for the future. Alessandro told her he had a son from a previous relationship, but he assured her that the past was behind him, and that now he was just looking for some stability. Giulia believed she'd met someone with whom she could build a solid relationship. Their romance developed really fast, and after just a few months, they decided to live together. Giulia sincerely hoped that moving to Milan would open up not just career prospects for her, but also bring her personal happiness. She was confident that with Alessandro, she was destined to create a family. But at that time, she didn't yet know what secrets this person was hiding and what her fateful decision would end up leading to. Alessandro Impiantoni was born in 1993. His life in Milan was far from stable, despite the confidence he talked about himself with. Working as a bartender in an elite establishment, he was in constant contact with wealthy clients, successful entrepreneurs, and celebrities, which allowed him to masterfully keep up this image of a person who was accustomed to luxury. I mean, this gave him not only a stable income, but also a lot of connections. He knew how to present himself properly, creating the illusion of a confident man who was supposedly aspiring to something greater. His colleagues considered him attractive, but superficial. He never really opened up, preferring to maintain the image of a lighthearted and sociable person. To clients and people around him, he gave the impression that he was living a full life. But behind this picture, there was a lot hidden that no one knew about. When he began dating Giulia, nothing in his behavior really revealed any hidden problems. On the contrary, at first he created the impression of an attentive and caring partner. He knew what to say and how to present himself in a favorable light. However, over time, Alessandro's character started to show itself differently. Gradually, problems began to pop up in the relationship. The first real alarming signals appeared soon after the couple started living together. Alessandro often joked about Giulia, but these jokes, they became more and more caustic. He'd draw attention to her accent, hinting that people from southern Italy were different from northern residents, for the worse. He would openly mock her football preferences, knowing this was an important topic for her. At first, Giulia didn't attach much importance to this. She thought it was just innocent teasing. However, over time, it became clear that something more was hidden behind these words. Arguments started happening more and more often. Alessandro showed irritation over little things. He didn't like how Giulia arranged things, how she reacted to his words, or how she asked questions. He could just abruptly cut off a conversation, or completely ignore her, making her feel guilty. In moments like that, he would become cold and distant, and then just as suddenly, go back to his old behavior as if nothing had happened. These emotional swings in their relationship became the norm. One day he could be gentle and attentive, and the next, absolutely indifferent. Giulia tried to understand what was happening, but there were never any explanations. He never spoke directly about his feelings, just leaving her in ignorance. However, the biggest deception, the one she didn't even suspect, was his double life. When Alessandro went to work, Giulia thought he was spending his evenings behind the bar. But in reality, he had been living on two fronts for a long time. Just a few months after they started living together, he had already started a relationship with another woman, Allegra. He met Allegra at work. She was younger than him, spoke several languages, and was building a career in the hotel business. Alessandro presented himself to her as a free man who had supposedly separated from Giulia a long time ago, but was just temporarily continuing to live with her because of some forced circumstances. He skillfully maintained this image, assuring Allegra that Giulia was already looking for a new place and would be moving out soon. Neither Giulia nor Allegra suspected the other one existed. For each of them, he played his part, hiding the truth so artfully that no little details raised any doubts. With one, he was building a future. With the other, he was just enjoying the moment, never allowing for the fact that his lies would someday come to light. The problems in the relationship with Giulia just kept on growing. She felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't figure out the reasons. Time passed. The tension increased. But Alessandro continued to lead his double game, not realizing that the end of his lies was already near. At the end of 2022, Giulia started to notice some changes in how she was feeling. Constant fatigue, unusual taste preferences, and a delay. It all made her think. Without putting it off, she bought a pregnancy test, and taking it at home, she saw two clear lines. Realizing that she was expecting a child, it brought up a lot of mixed feelings in her. On one hand, she had always dreamed of a family and children. On the other hand, the last few months of her relationship with Alessandro had been really difficult. But despite this, she decided she had to tell him the news in person. Choosing a convenient moment, Giulia excitedly told Alessandro that she was pregnant. She expected a lot of different reactions: surprise, joy, maybe even a little alarm, but his face just towered. It remained impassive. He was silent for several seconds, and then he asked a single question: was she sure about this? He showed no interest, didn't ask any questions about how far along she was or how she was feeling. His indifference was obvious. In the days that followed, he didn't bring up the topic again, didn't discuss future plans, didn't ask about any upcoming doctor visits. Julia felt abandoned, but she hoped that over time he would accept the situation and start to show some involvement. As the new year began, Alessandro's attitude didn't change. Julia found herself spending more and more evenings alone, just thinking about her future. She kept working, tried not to dwell on what was happening, but the anxiety inside her was just growing. Meanwhile, a new turn of events happened in Alessandro's life. At the beginning of 2023, he learned that his lover, Allegra, was also pregnant. This news, it caught him completely off guard. Allegra, just like Julia, didn't suspect the existence of another woman and thought she had a real relationship with Alessandro. But unlike Julia, she wasn't sure if she wanted to keep the pregnancy. Realizing that his double life was crumbling, Alessandro convinced Allegra that a child didn't really fit into their plans right now. He told her he would support whatever decision she made, but he kinda hinted that terminating the pregnancy would probably be the best option. Allegra hesitated for a long time, but eventually, she accepted his arguments. Alessandro went with her to the medical procedure, making sure that the issue was closed. He hoped that he could now focus on solving the other problem, Julia's pregnancy. But unlike Allegra, Julia firmly decided to keep the child despite how detached Alessandro was. He tried to convince her to reconsider her decision, but Julia, she didn't change her mind. For her, this was a conscious step. She felt that her relationship with Alessandro had reached a dead end, but she was ready to raise the baby on her own. She didn't know that this choice would become a turning point in her fate. Her firm decision destroyed his plans, and it forced him to look for another way to get rid of the problem. All of this led to Alessandro systematically studying information about poisons. He searched the internet for methods of poisoning. He analyzed which substances could be effective while staying unnoticeable. Among the options, he looked into chemical compounds found in household products, plant poisons, and also things like ricin and cyanide compounds. However, most of the substances he found were hard to get, or they left obvious traces in the victim's body. So as a result, his choice fell on rodenticides preparations for destroying rodents. They were sold without a prescription and didn't raise any suspicions. On top of that, he found information that some types slowly destroy the organism, causing internal bleeding, weakness, and anemia, which could look a lot like pregnancy complications. From the beginning of 2023, Alessandro began to put his plan into action. He started mixing poison into Julia's food and drinks in small doses, hoping her health would just start to deteriorate. And after several weeks, she did in fact develop strange symptoms: constant fatigue, dizziness, nausea, and sharp pains in her abdomen. Julia complained to friends about her deteriorating condition, but she just attributed it to the pregnancy. She didn't suspect the real cause was something else entirely. Alessandro carefully monitored her condition, expecting the effect to be stronger. Disappointed, he began searching for information on how to enhance the action of the poisonous substance, but there was still no result. Julia continued to feel unwell, but her body was resisting and the pregnancy continued to develop. This enraged Alessandro. His initial plan hadn't worked, and now he was forced to look for another way out of the situation. Alessandro was accustomed to controlling his environment. He'd carefully constructed his lies. He knew what to say and how to convince each woman of his version of events. You see, Julia believed he was simply going through a difficult period and would soon change his attitude toward the pregnancy. And Allegra, she was confident that he had long since ended any relationship with his former partner. However, one wrong step ended up destroying his carefully thought-out game. The first alarming signal for Allegra was that Alessandro got noticeably nervous whenever the conversation turned to his past. He avoided any talk about his life before he met her. He didn't show himself on social media, and he never mentioned his former partner. At first, this didn't really raise suspicions, but gradually, the inconsistencies started to pile up. The real turning point, though, came when Allegra accidentally saw some photos on his phone. These were recent pictures where he was with Julia, their poses, their looks. Everything about them suggested that these relationships were far from over. Allegra decided not to jump to any conclusions. She just started observing him, remembering all the little details. He often went out in the evenings, saying he was staying late at work, but at the hotel, his colleagues noted he'd actually left earlier. Sometimes, he wouldn't answer her calls, and then would make up excuses later. When Allegra finally asked him about the photos, Alessandro, he wasn't confused. His reaction was immediate. He just declared that Giulia couldn't come to terms with the breakup and was specifically spreading these pictures around to make him feel guilty. Allegra wanted to believe him, but something in his explanation just seemed strange to her. She began asking more questions, and he started responding with less and less confidence. Trying to divert her attention, Alessandro suddenly declared that Giulia not only couldn't forget him, but had also invented the pregnancy just to keep him. So now, he was trying to convince Allegra that the child didn't actually exist. But his haste, it only made her more suspicious. Alessandro prepared a fake DNA test, changing the data in a file he'd downloaded from the internet. According to him, this test was supposed to prove that he had nothing to do with the child. Allegra accepted this version, but her doubts didn't disappear. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she didn't know. A few days later, she decided to check everything herself. Taking Alessandro's phone while he was asleep, she found Giulia's number and sent her a message. The response came back almost immediately. Giulia didn't seem like a woman who was obsessed with revenge. On the contrary, she also wanted to learn the truth. The next day, Allegra suggested they meet in person. The meeting between Giulia and Allegra took place at the hotel where Allegra worked. They had arranged the time in advance, but neither of them really understood just how deeply Alessandro had deceived her. And Giulia. She couldn't believe that the man with whom she was building a future had been living a double life. Allegra was the first one to share what she had learned. She told her how Alessandro had assured her that Giulia was no longer a part of his life. Then, she mentioned the DNA test that supposedly proved the child wasn't his. Giulia listened carefully. When Allegra finished, she just calmly said that the test was fake. She had never suggested taking any tests. Moreover, she said the term of the pregnancy lined up perfectly with their relationship. And on top of that, she said they were still living together, and that Alessandro had never given her any reason to think their relationship was over. With each minute that passed, Allegra was realizing more and more clearly that she had been deceived from the very beginning. Her perception of the situation completely changed. She no longer had any doubt about the truth. The hurt was all intertwined with disappointment, but there was no anger toward Giulia. On the contrary, it now became obvious that they had both become victims of the same lie. The conversation lasted for over an hour. The women discussed details of their relationships with Alessandro, trying to piece the whole picture together. By the end of the conversation, they didn't feel like rivals anymore. A strange sense of solidarity had actually grown between them. At some point, Giulia made a final decision. She was not going to stay with someone who manipulated her feelings and tried to hide a second life. Her future now belonged only to her and her child. After returning home, she didn't wait for the right moment. She immediately told Alessandro that she knew about everything and that everything between them was over. His reaction was predictable. He first tried to deny it all. Then, he started blaming her for prying into his life. But Giulia was no longer listening to his excuses. She told him she was going to Naples and that she didn't want to have anything to do with him anymore. That evening, she wrote to her mother and her sister, telling them about her decision. They supported her and offered to help. Giulia reassured them, saying she would first sort out her affairs in Milan and then come home in a few days. She didn't know this evening would be the last of her life. After the conversation with Giulia, Alessandro realized the situation was getting out of his control. Everything he had hidden was now out in the open. Giulia knew the truth. She knew about his double life. She knew he had tried to deceive her. She no longer believed him and didn't want to listen. She had decided to leave, and she wasn't going to let him manipulate her. Her calmness, it just enraged Alessandro. He couldn't understand how it all happened, how he ended up in a position where his deception was exposed, and he couldn't do anything about it. He felt like he was losing not only his influence over Giulia, but also his reputation. I mean, if she told someone else about this, his life would completely fall apart. On this day, the tension between them reached its absolute limit. Giulia was ignoring all of Alessandro's attempts to start a conversation. She just kept packing, showing no emotion at all. Her silence only angered him more. Alessandro tried to convince her that she was wrong, that he loved her, that she should reconsider her decision, but Giulia, she didn't react. He started raising his voice, just trying to get at least some kind of reaction from her, but Giulia wouldn't get into an argument. When he realized her decision was final, an uncontrollable anger just completely overwhelmed him. He grabbed a knife from the counter, and, in a fury, he struck the first blow. Giulia didn't have time to react. The blow was unexpected and precise. But this wasn't enough for him. He just kept striking, not even thinking about the consequences. The panic and the fear of being exposed only pushed him further. He couldn't stop. 37 knife wounds. Alessandro looked at the body lying on the floor. Now, he had to get rid of the evidence. He couldn't just leave her like this. He knew that blood leaves traces. He understood that a body couldn't just be hidden. So, he began dragging her to the bathroom. There, he doused her body with alcohol and set it on fire, hoping this would help hide the traces of the crime. But the fire, it couldn't handle the task. The flames only left burns, but they didn't destroy the body. Alessandro felt a sense of panic. He didn't know what to do next. He brought out rags and cleaning supplies, and he began cleaning the blood, wiping the floor, the walls, the furniture. He washed and scrubbed, but the traces were still there. The apartment still looked like a crime scene. Alessandro realized he wasn't going to be able to completely hide what had happened. But despite this, he was confident he could think of a way to get out of this situation unscathed. He didn't know yet that the police would very soon connect all the evidence and prove his guilt. So, the first step in his plan was to stage a disappearance. For this, he took her phone and started sending messages to her family and friends. He knew her loved ones would worry if she just suddenly vanished. Because of that, he had to keep up the illusion that Giulia had simply decided to take a break for a while. He wrote to her mother that she needed to be alone for a little bit. The message was short and restrained so it wouldn't arouse suspicion. Then he sent a few messages to Giulia's friend, explaining that she had gone away but didn't want to say where just yet. He did all of this so that everyone around them would get the impression that Giulia had left of her own free will. However, his plan didn't end there. Alessandro understood that sooner or later, someone would raise the alarm. So, a few hours after the murder, he himself went to the police and reported Giulia's disappearance. He said that she had left the house after an argument and just hadn't come back. His version was simple. In the morning, he had gone to work, and when he returned, Giulia wasn't there. He specifically added details that were supposed to look plausible. He said that her personal belongings, her passport, and her money had disappeared with her, kinda hinting that she might have left for another place. Investigators listened to him carefully, but even then, his behavior was raising suspicions. He spoke a little too confidently, almost like he knew in advance what questions they were going to ask him. And unlike Giulia's relatives and friends, who were panicking, he remained calm. While the police began their search, Alessandro was busy trying to dispose of the body. Initially, he left it in the bathroom, but he understood he couldn't keep it there for long. He wrapped Giulia's body in polyethylene and carried it to the garage in the middle of the night. In the days that followed, he changed the storage location several times. The criminal hid the body in the basement of their building, then moved it back to the garage. He was trying to figure out how to get rid of it permanently, but the longer Alessandro delayed, the more evidence he left behind. The police began checking his testimony, questioning neighbors, and looking for inconsistencies. And while he thought he was controlling the situation, investigators were already on his trail. After Alessandro reported Giulia's disappearance, the police began their standard search procedures. The first serious piece of evidence was the blood traces they found in the man's car. Despite all his attempts to clean the vehicle, modern forensic methods made it possible to detect the biological traces. Officers conducted a rapid analysis and confirmed that the blood belonged to Giulia. The second piece of evidence was found in the entrance of the building where they lived. On the stairs and in the corridor, there were still traces of a red substance that, at first, seemed like just dust or some liquid stains. However, after chemical processing, it was revealed that these were partially washed away blood traces. The investigation also paid attention to Alessandro's behavior. He didn't call her relatives to ask for help with the search. He showed no initiative in spreading information. He just limited himself to the standard formal steps, which seemed suspicious. An important stage of the investigation was studying his electronic devices. Experts confiscated his phone, his computer, and his tablet. The results of the analysis proved to be shocking. First, investigators discovered search queries that Alessandro had made several months before the murder. He had searched for information about poisons, he'd studied the effects of various toxins, and he'd read articles about how to imperceptibly poison someone. Moreover, the browser history recorded questions about why certain poisonous substances might not work as expected. They showed him photographs of the blood traces, they demonstrated the search queries on his devices, and they brought in witnesses who had heard noise and screams coming from their apartment. A key moment was studying Alessandro's movements in the days after the disappearance. Surveillance camera recordings showed that for several days after she had supposedly disappeared, he repeatedly went down to the garage, carried bags there, and then returned empty-handed. Under the pressure of all this evidence, Alessandro started to get confused in his testimony. Finally, he broke down, and he indicated where he had hidden the body. On June 1st, 2023, police discovered Giulia's remains in an overgrown area near the town of Sanago. The examination showed that someone had tried to burn the body, but the process was interrupted. Despite the attempts to hide the traces, experts were able to establish the cause of death and gather the evidence that would confirm his guilt. After Alessandro's arrest, investigators and experts tried to understand his personality. He went through a psychological examination, and the results confirmed his psychopathic tendencies. Forensic psychiatrists concluded that he demonstrated really pronounced traits of narcissistic personality disorder. He felt no remorse for what he had done, and his behavior during interrogations and in court, it just spoke of a deep egocentrism and a lack of empathy. Alessandro perceived the people around him exclusively through the prism of his own interests, not recognizing other people's emotions and feelings. His actions were directed solely at preserving his reputation and controlling the situation. Any loss of power over the people around him, it caused aggression in him. At trial, he tried to portray remorse, but his words found no response. Not from the victim's relatives, and not from society. He said he didn't understand how he could have done such a thing. He claimed it was an impulse, that he just didn't realize what he was doing. However, the prosecutors presented the court with the entire evidence base. His search, queries about poisons, the poisoning attempts, forging the DNA test, the false report to the police. All of these facts proved the crime was planned. After Alessandro's arrest and exposure, Allegra assisted the investigation. She provided the police with all of her correspondence with him, which proved that he had lied to both her and to Giulia. She also gave testimony about the forged DNA test and his attempts to manipulate her. At the trial, Allegra was present as a witness. The prosecutors called her to confirm some key moments.
Ricordo che era una ragazza estremamente sensibile e rispettosa delle emozioni altrui e troppo spesso insicura.
How Alessandro had hidden his double life, how he had lied about Giulia's pregnancy, and what excuses he had invented when the truth started to surface. According to eyewitnesses, in the courtroom, Allegra looked shaken. She realized that if it wasn't for the accidental discovery of those photos on Alessandro's phone, the truth might have been revealed far too late. After the trial, she refused to communicate with journalists, she avoided all publicity, and just tried to distance herself from the tragedy. According to some reports, after the trial she left Milan and moved to another city to start her life anew, away from the memories connected to this case. The court found Alessandro guilty of premeditated murder with aggravating circumstances. These circumstances included the cruelty of the crime, the fact that there was prolonged abuse of the victim, and his deliberate attempts to hide the evidence. He was sentenced to life imprisonment.
Conferma l'impugnata sentenza nel trattamento sanzionatorio della pena principale dell'ergastolo, delle pene accessorie conseguenti e comunque nel resto delle statuti.
Andare Giulia, ma non è questo il momento, però è finita questa dolorosa esperienza. Sono d'accordo con il verdetto del giudice, posso dire solo.
The judge, in the closing statement, noted that crimes like this cannot be justified by affect or some temporary loss of control, since the criminal's actions over several months proved his intent to get rid of Giulia.